Jared Verse is coming off one of the best rookie seasons that I've ever seen for an NFL edge rusher, deservedly won Defensive Rookie of the Year. Barring an injury, I think you can pretty much pencil him in for 80 pressures and 7 sacks, give or take, every year for the next decade. Most players, after their first year, you kind of compare them, see how they stack up with the other rookies in their class. But Verse established himself immediately as the best rookie edge rusher. That was never really a question. And I was really impressed with Chop Robinson, but Verse held on to that title pretty decisively over the course of the season and proved that he already belongs in the discussion with other Pro Bowl caliber veterans. He led the NFL with 89 total pressures last year. Now, he did benefit from having the 2 extra playoff games, but still had the 4th most pressures in the regular season, ranked top 10 in all the per snap metrics, pressure rate, pass rush win rate, PFF grade, and he was a high impact in both phases. This plot has rookie edge rushers since 2006, with run defense on the x-axis and pass rush grade on the y. Verse is at the top of that cluster with the Bosa brothers, Von Miller, Myles Garrett. Pretty good company to be in. And I mean, this was a pro-ready player coming out. There's no reason to expect any kind of regression. Probably not somebody that's going to dramatically transform their game over the next few years, but I really expect him to be just a set it and forget it, productive, top-tier edge rusher for the remainder of his career. So as a 24-year-old rookie with a ton of experience, multiple years of college production, he entered the league and was effective right out of the gate. But what's so unique about Verse is the way that he wins and the simplicity of his pass rushing plan. If you follow any of my writing, the last 2 summers, I've done a super in-depth study of NFL pass rushers where I chart every pressure by pass rushing move for like the top 50 edge rushers for each season. I'll link my article on this from a few weeks ago where I broke down the results in the description, but it's a really good way of categorizing players stylistically. And Verse is the most, I don't want to say one-dimensional because that has a negative connotation, but he's the most specialized edge rusher that I've ever charted. In 2024, he had 47 pressures with a power move, so bull rush or long arm. That led the NFL by 17, and it's the most for a single season over the last 2 years at least. He also used a power move on 69% of his pressures, which again is the highest rate of any of the 121 seasons in my database. He basically has one go-to move that he uses over and over and over again. It's not a very advanced or detailed move set. I don't watch Jared Verse and come away with a renewed love for the art of pass rushing. And if you're game planning for him as an offensive tackle, you know pretty much exactly how he's going to attack you heading into the matchup. The problem is that even with the answers to the test, most tackles simply couldn't stop his bull rush. He went into every hand with his cards flipped, so to speak, but if you've got pocket aces, you're still going to win at a high rate regardless of what your opponent does. Verse checks almost every box that you look for in a power rusher. He's got a sturdy, compact build, only 260, which is average size for an edge, but he's just under 6'4" with a rocked up physique, probably a very low body fat percentage based on the eye test. So all of his mass is consolidated into this densely packed ball of power. He's shorter than pretty much every tackle he faces, so he's naturally a leverage monster, but he rushes with consistently low pad level, so he's maximizing that built-in advantage. He has heavy hands to create knockback with his initial punch, and then he churns his legs relentlessly and drives his opponent backwards once he gets underneath their pads. I view a bull rush as consisting of 2 general phases. You've got the initial point of contact where you create an early advantage, and then the drive phase where you put the blocker in reverse, create displacement, finish the rep. A lot of pass rushers across the league are particularly effective in one phase, but relatively deficient in the other. So you'll see smaller speed rushers with elite burst off the line who can generate some serious knockback with their initial strike. And a lot of times that's enough to either win in dominant fashion or dismantle the block enough to clear open an easy path to the quarterback. But when those players get into a gridlock, stalemate type of situation, and they gotta just get underneath the blocker's pads, churn their legs down the middle, they don't really have the drive power to sustain their initial momentum and give you that steady pocket push. And then there's other players who are less explosive and don't really have the sudden burst to jolt the blocker on first contact, but they have the mass and the play strength to just gradually compress the pocket over time. Somebody like Chop Robinson fits into that first category, where he can just charge into a block, convert that upfield momentum into a quick surge of power. But if he doesn't win early, he isn't really able to accumulate damage over time. But then a player like T'Vondre Sweat would be on the other end of the spectrum. He doesn't have a very quick first step, so the impact from the initial collision is pretty modest. But after 4 or 5 seconds of steady force, he eventually just overwhelms smaller opponents, so his bull rush is much more of a slow burn. To be a truly elite power rusher, I think you gotta be effective on both ends. You need to be able to deliver enough impact on first contact to soften your opponent's anchor and be able to sustain your momentum and channel it into drive power. Verse is unsurprisingly exceptional in both phases, and even though his broad moveset is pretty simple, he's able to win with power in a lot of different ways. I think the most entertaining bull rushes to watch are the first category, and Verse has plenty of those on his rookie tape. He is routinely able to capture a significant advantage within just the first second of the interaction. You get the straight line burst where he can just launch off the line of scrimmage, the violent hand pop to really rattle his opponent's pads on initial contact. His initial impact can be so devastating, whether he's completely dislodging and uprooting his opponent's anchor, or just softening it enough to kind of pry open an entry point to the pocket and then transition to a counter move. This play, he's a tick late getting into his rush, but Verse doesn't need a long runway to build up momentum. If he's got to fight through a chip or work over a couple gaps on a stunt, that loss of time doesn't impact Verse nearly as much as it does for most edge rushers. He can ramp up to a pretty formidable gear from a complete standstill with no runway. He just got that sudden burst to catapult from 0 to 60 before the tackle even has time to react. And when you talk about speed to power conversion, nobody converts that speed to power more efficiently than Jared Verse. You know, as a power rusher, you have a finite amount of momentum and you're trying to translate as much of that as possible into your opponent. Any kind of imprecise hand placement, sloppy pad level, misdirected footwork or angles, you want to be pointed with your hips directly towards the blocker. Any kind of imperfection in your technique is going to marginally decrease your power output. With Jared Verse, he's not only able to ramp up to a threatening speed in a split second, he is channeling what seems like 99.9% of that momentum right down the middle of his opponent. He's got tight hand placement, relentless leg drive. His pad level as a bull rusher is about as good as it gets. I mean, he basically just sticks his helmet into the blocker's belly button. But as far as that initial knockback, it's just a maximum efficiency speed to power conversion. The other thing that really stood out about Verse's tape is the quality of competition that he was beating. Like I said, I've charted pretty much all of the top pass rushers across the league, and Verse was getting pressures against tackles that I didn't see lose to anyone else. Just flipping through some plays, like he's got multiple wins against Brian O'Neill, really good right tackle, Jordan Mailata, he had 3 pressures against Mailata, Colton Miller, really good left tackle for the Raiders, Paris Johnson Jr., Olu Fashanu, Charles Cross, really good young tackles who I think struggled with Verse more than they did with anyone else this year. Taylor Decker for the Lions, Zach Tom from the Packers, Deion Dawkins, great left tackle for Buffalo. For the vast majority of NFL pass rushers, when you look at the distribution of their pressures or their pass rush wins, most players are cleaning up on the Titans tackles, the Patriots tackles, the Seahawks right tackle. The bottom feeders make up a much greater proportion of the league-wide pressures than you'd actually expect. Verse obviously had his way with the Trevor Pennings of the world, but he treated Pro Bowl tackles like practice squad players. I mean, you see the dominant reverse pancake on Jordan Mailata. This rep, I actually don't fault Mailata as much for. I think based on Verse's alignment, he just wasn't expecting him into his frame that quickly. Wasn't even really at the top of his set yet. Awesome play from Verse's perspective, but people were kind of clowning Jordan Mailata, and I don't think it's that bad of a rep. This play, he's got to navigate through the chip help, so again, he doesn't really have any space to ramp up to a formidable speed. But even with just 1 or 2 steps and a forceful 2-hand strike, he's able to completely annihilate his opponent's anchor. Doesn't just jolt him off balance, he actually creates a lot of physical separation between himself and the blocker. Right out of that initial punch, he's got a wide open pathway to Sam Darnold, and he gets in on the sack. I always prefer watching best on best from a competition standpoint, but sometimes it's really fun to watch a player like Jared Verse just bulldoze someone like Trevor Penning, who has absolutely no idea how to respond to a bull rush. This play right here, Vikings backup tackle, take it with a grain of salt. But I wanted to point out this play to highlight the exact opposite of what you should do technically to counter Verse's bull rush. Since he uses it like 75% of the time, there are a good amount of reps of people winning against him decisively, and the only real times that I've seen people have success against him is when they are proactive, meeting power with power. You got to come at him with an aggressive punch to really try to put a dent in his initial momentum upfield. If you're playing him like I think David Quessenberry here and just bracing for contact, hoping for the best, he's going to run right through you. A really nice initial surge here against Colton Miller. Heavy hands at the point of attack, displaces him with a straight up down the middle rush, and then forces his way through the inside shoulder. So the first step quickness, the explosive pop into contact, and just the automatic hand placement and pad level makes him a bludgeoning power rusher with devastating initial knockback. But when he isn't able to jolt his opponent off balance with that initial stab, he's got a persistent, overwhelming drive phase to just tunnel his way into the pocket step by step. Ideally, the 2 segments of a bull rush that I've talked about work together harmoniously. You get a fast start, stick the landing, and finish the play. That, I think, would describe the majority of Verse's power wins. But on the occasion that he is slow off the line or he misses with his hands, whatever the case may be, he's got that sustainable drive power that he can access at any time. And even if he's not getting a clean, dominant pressure, he can at least compress the pocket, remove space for the quarterback to step into, all that good stuff. This is another really nice pressure against Mailata. You don't see a lot of pass rushers that are able to walk him back this effortlessly. Another thing I've noticed studying offensive linemen from last year is how often I watch a player, maybe watch 5 or 6 games, and I'm like, hey, this guy's got a really solid anchor. Then I get to the Jared Verse matchup and he's getting ragdolled, pushed all over the place. I had that exact realization watching Paris Johnson Jr. It was just, consecutive games of really clean tape, and then he runs into Verse and he's just a completely different animal. Obviously, he's the most productive power rusher in the NFL, but I think it's a step above just a pure volume thing. I think you could make the case that he has one of the 2 or 3 best bull rushes among NFL edge rushers as a rookie. The other area that you'll see his power show up is on stunts and twists. He has the closing burst and just densely packed power to absolutely demolish unsuspecting blockers. When you deploy him as a looper and he can just charge full speed into a blocker that isn't even looking at him, he puts 350-pound offensive linemen in the air. This play, Mekhi Becton's a little bit slow to process the line game. Verse absolutely obliterates him from the side, gets a sack. This one isn't even like a traditional TE stun or anything. He's just kind of one-on-one. Uses an inside spin counter, which you almost never see him use. Colton McKivitz tries to pass him off to Dominic Pooney, but Pooney isn't ready for it and he gets flattened. This is another example here against the Dolphins of his rare ability to generate momentum in a phone booth. I keep talking about whether or not he has a runway to build up speed. That really matters, but he just has incredible power and he can access it on demand. Now, we're pretty deep into this video, and you may have noticed that I haven't really mentioned anything besides his bull rush, but the amount of attention I've given to his other moves is representative of how often he uses and wins with them on tape. Verse doesn't have the most diverse, well-rounded skill set as a pass rusher. His rush plan isn't very layered or difficult to key in on. If he had, average production, I would be saying that as more of a criticism. But he led the league in pressures with one of the most rudimentary movesets you'll ever see in the NFL. So I guess it's more of just an interesting thing to note. I do think there's room for growth despite how good he is already when we talk about reaching an even higher level. He has a stab chop that I would say is his primary speed move. It was moderately effective, I think a lot more effective in college, but it's not something that opposing tackles are worried about heading into the matchup. If he can refine that move and win the outside track at a little bit higher of a rate, I think that could elevate his game pretty substantially. And most of that improvement would actually materialize indirectly. Getting like 7 more pressures with a speed rush next year would be nice, but that's not really the main point. If he can put a few more outside wins on tape and just give tackles another move they have to think about, the cascading effects would be more significant than just a handful more pressures. He was the most disruptive pass rusher in the NFL last year, and on almost every play, the opposing blocker was thinking bull rush, bull rush, bull rush from the snap to the whistle. His bull rush was dominant against tackles who were bracing for it for the entire rep. If he can force them to respect another move, even if he only uses it a few times per week, that would create a really effective distraction that could enhance his overall game. I think there are some limitations as far as the ceiling that he can reach as a speed rusher. He's definitely explosive enough to threaten the edge. He is just really stiff when he tries to sink at the top of the rush and bend back to the quarterback. You see it even when he's trying to just weave through traffic, like not even specifically using a speed rush. He's just not that flexible, changing directions and reversing his track, but he does still have a lot going for him as a speed rusher. I mentioned the linear athleticism, that's kind of the starting point, but his chop move is lethal. I mean, the hand pop that you see with him as a power rusher, that translates to him just annihilating the tackle's outside hand. The nature of the move and how decisive the wins are when they come really complements his overall strengths and weaknesses. Since he isn't this bendy, flexible, rip and dip guy who can just squeeze through tight crevices, to work his way around the corner, he needs as clean of a path as possible. The speed chop, when it lands, like everything is a critical hit. He's either crushing the outside hand and just creating a gaping, clean angle to the quarterback, or creating a chain reaction where he's pulling the tackle down to the ground with his chop. There aren't a lot of messy, grinded out wins when he uses a speed rush because he just isn't a very flexible or fluid athlete. But I think perfecting this move as much as he possibly can will go a long way towards improving his overall game. I think his inconsistency as a speed rusher is partially due to some of the athletic limitations, but for me, if there was one thing that I was disappointed with about Jared Verse's rookie tape, is that he didn't really string the few moves that he did use together in a very purposeful sequence to set up his counters, build moves off of one another. The stab chop is a perfectly fine move in a vacuum, but it's really best paired with a long arm, which Verse does not use that often despite his heavy power profile. He only had 1 pressure with a long arm last year compared to 44 with a standard bull rush. And I'll put up some clips I'll find an NFL veteran that goes long arm to stab chop to kind of show you what it's supposed to look like. The idea with that 2-move sequence is that you go long arm, long arm, long arm. Then the next time you extend that arm, the blocker starts to brace for power, throws a 2-hand punch. You immediately transition to the stab chop, knock down that arm. You've got a clear pathway around the corner. You can still major in a bull rush and a stab chop. It's just the synergy between those 2 moves is kind of diminished by the fact that he doesn't use a long arm, so he doesn't get the benefit of every move looking identical in the first part of the play. And then this play from week 1 is one of my favorite Jared Verse reps from the entire season. I was expecting this kind of thing to be a prominent feature of his pass rushing plan, but I didn't see him win with this fake chop into the bull rush again for the rest of the season. This is the kind of salesmanship that you need to really set up moves effectively, especially if you've got some rigidity changing directions at the top of the rush. Would love to see him put together a really concise sequence of moves that play off of each other effectively. I'm not saying he needs to have this huge pass rushing bag, that's never going to be his game, but adding just a little bit of indecisiveness in the back of the tackle's mind really goes a long way as far as setting up the rest of your pass rushing approach. And then the other quick thing to mention with his pass rushing, I thought there were some really impressive examples of him naturally, effortlessly transitioning to counters. When you're a power-dependent pass rusher to the extent that Jared Verse is, a lot of your wins are going to be like halfway wins and halfway pressures. Maybe you can drive a guy back 3 yards into the pocket, but then he finally sets his anchor, stalls you out a couple yards away from the quarterback. You got to have immediate counters that you can access automatically without thinking to get you the rest of the way there. I thought Verse was very decisive and efficient transitioning to counters. Even on pressures that I would technically chart as a bull rush, there's sometimes a speed element to those plays. He was really good about letting the bull rush take him 90% of the way there. When he gets stalled out, quickly transition to a chop or an underhook to finish the job. And then he was also fairly effective on inside counters. I don't remember that being a huge aspect of his game in college. And I mean, he got 6 pressures with it last year, so it's not like he's cleaning up on inside counters. But that's another nice changeup that he can continue to integrate more and more. But the actual last thing I have to mention is his tackling. Jared Verse was straight up one of the worst tacklers in the NFL last year, regardless of position. He had a 25.6% missed tackle rate and 21 total missed tackles, which was the most among all edge rushers. I've been talking about Jared Verse like he's this super productive player, and he was from a pressure standpoint and when you look at more advanced metrics. But if you just pull up his ESPN page, especially since they count sacks differently than PFF, I mean, he only had 4.5 sacks last year, pretty modest production for the defensive rookie of the year. And the amount of missed sacks on his tape is pretty staggering. I mean, his lack of sacks are not due to his deficiencies as a pass rusher. It's purely a finishing issue. Hopefully that can improve. 23.4% missed tackle rate for his college career, so I'm not super optimistic. I think having a little bit shorter arms and being kind of stiff and tight, changing directions is not a great combination for tackling consistency. If he maintains his efficiency and effectiveness as a pass rusher, like his win rate, but he doesn't fix his tackling issues, I mean, we're going to be looking at historic amounts of production that get left on the field over the course of his career. And finally, we got to close off with Jared Verse's run defense. And we just talked about the tackling. That's kind of like the one fatal flaw for him as a run defender. But outside of the missed tackles, this dude is an absolute force in the run game. He doesn't have a very imposing size length profile, and that does show up occasionally. Like, you can get him on the ground if you really sustain a block for a long time and just continue to apply force. He is just such an effective block shedder, diagnoses the play extremely quickly. In the run game, I do feel like he partially offset some of his tackling issues with just a relentless motor, especially from the backside. I mean, so many chase down tackles on his tape. This is not a guy that you can just run away from and expect him to not impact the play. He can either set the edge and just hold his point in the C gap or completely cave in his side of the line of scrimmage. He's really crafty with his hands in the run game. He's got a nice push-pull, swims and swipes to kind of slice through blocks. And then I also thought he was outstanding when it comes to navigating traffic in the backfield. You can send waves of pullers and slice blocks to try to keep him occupied on the backside. He weaves through whatever traffic is in his way, like Landon Jackson doing the dummy drills. He had 32 run stops last year, which was the second most among NFL edge defenders. A run stop is a run tackle that results in an unsuccessful play for the offense. So really complete player who's a high impact in both phases. Basically just a wind up battering ram that's going to be a guaranteed 70 to 80 pressures every year. Sack production will depend on him learning how to tackle. His weaknesses are pretty straightforward, and it's a short list. Number one is the tackling. We'll see if that can improve, but that is by far the biggest limiting factor on his overall production. You got the lack of bend, which, probably is not going to improve significantly, but I still think he can be a more effective speed rusher than he is at this point if he just sequences his limited move set together with a little bit more purpose and builds a concise plan that maybe doesn't have a wide range of moves, but each one builds off of the other one. The success that Jared Verse had as a rookie, especially compared to somebody like Leatu Latu, I think is a really good example of the disparity in how translatable speed versus power is from college to the NFL. There's obviously still a jump in level of competition when it comes to a tackle's ability to anchor in the NFL versus college, but power is just so much more translatable and dependable. These are my skill ratings for Jared Verse. I have these scaled based on NFL starters, where 50 is adequate for an NFL starter. 75 plus is very good. Anything below 25 is poor. To me, the true standout traits that he brings to the table are explosiveness, obviously his power. I mean, I'm pretty conservative when it comes to throwing out 90 plus grades. His block avoidance, like navigating traffic as a run defender, and then his play recognition, I think were also very good. That's gonna do it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and leave a comment to help boost the algorithm. Greatly appreciate that. And if you aren't already, make sure to subscribe. I'll be pumping out these rookie film breakdowns for the rest of the summer.